Hello everyone, I have just read the first chapter of The Last of the Jedi. It's not just Last of the Jedi now. They changed the name from The Last of the Jedi to just The Last of the Jedi, come around the 6th book, but I'm still going to refer to it as The Last of the Jedi. So I've just read The Last of the Jedi Return of the Dark Side, yes, not... It is, that's Return of the Dark Side, and I've just read its first chapter. So, we learn that it's been about 2 days since the end of the last book, and Ferris has almost completely fixed the book, and we learn that it was a bit of, well, now what? Ferris kind of impulsively stayed behind, and that was something I was, if you remember in my Tangled Web review, I was a bit of, well, why can't Ferris just go with them? You know, and we learn that Ferris doesn't even quite know why he stuck around either. And how he feels like, he has some idea of why he stuck around. He feels like he has an obligation to help the Somalians straighten out their immediate problems, as it says. But even so, it's, it was just, as it says, it had been a spur of the moment decision. He'd sent his friends off to safety, but he had remained. And, but he knows this isn't what he's meant to be doing, because, he still has his mission to find Jedi, and he keeps getting sidetracked and gets being put onto other stuff, and he just thinks, Obi-Wan wouldn't let this happen, why is it happening to me? And we get a bit of a recap. Again, that's a lot of the first chapters do this, we get a recap of the previous couple of books. And we learn that first is starting to feel like the surviving Jedi are just few and far between, because so far he's only found 2, hasn't he? He's only found Fighter Orana, now known as Solace, and Gavin Mullen. And he thinks that there has to be a better way to do this. And we're reminded about why he's here on Somalia. And as it says, and so Ferris Olin, double agent, was born. He wore the label uneasily. He didn't like working for the Empire, even though he was trying to undermine it at the same time. He didn't like being this close to the dark side. And then Vader comes in, and he says, you should be finished by now. And Ferris, again with his humour, says, hey, don't you ever say hello? And Vader ignores it and tells him that Emperor Palpatine is going to be here soon, and he's requested his presence at the landing platform at the Hall of Ministers in 15 minutes. And he explains that Bog Divinian, there we go, is receiving a tribute from the Somalian Ministers of State. Ferris is curious as to why Palpatine's coming here, because again, he almost never leaves Coruscant now. Vader says that it's not for you to question. Be there. And he leaves. And as he leaves, Ferris just mutters, nice to see you too. Again, we learn that Vader is technically Ferris's boss, as he's in charge of the stuff things on Samaria, and again, Vader treats Ferris with thinly veiled boredom and contempt, and Ferris is kind of glad of that, because he doesn't want to pretend they're buddies. And he winds up leaving the computer room with the Platform 7 BRT computer droid. He makes his way over to the turbo lifts. Again, we're reminded of the layouts of Saf. And as he's as he's making his way to the landing platform, as he can very easily get there through turbo lifts and connecting hallways, he notices that there's quite a bit of extra buzz going around in the hallways. And as it says, although there was a healthy opposition to the Empire in Snath, ministers were canny politicians. They'd curry favour with the Emperor if they had to. And Ferris is curious as to why the Emperor requested his presence specifically, when it's a very ceremonial and in the authoritative sense occasion. And again, we reminded that Ferris let Astri Odo go. And he thinks there's no way for Palpatine to know that, or was there? And he wonders why Palpatine was so interested in Somalia, because Lemurtu, of course, is a small system. There's only the neighbouring planet of Rosha around the same sun. And, of course, we were reminded that Palpatine told him he wanted to help Somalia, but Ferris doesn't believe it. And again, we're reminded he just wants to be back with his friend again at the asteroid. But he thinks, for now, he better stick around. He had a feeling his work here wasn't quite done. And that's how we end this chapter off. I don't really have a lot to say on this chapter, because again, half of it is just catching us back up. You know, it's just catching us back up. But I enjoyed it. But there really is not a lot to it. But it does bring up but it does clear up a couple of things that, you know, I was curious about. Like, why was Ferris staying behind on Somalia? You know, he could have easily just gone with his friends, but he didn't for some reason. I guess to fix the book. But, you know, this first chapter pretty much makes it clear as to why he stayed behind. He didn't quite know himself. He made it out of impulse, but but then he kind of figures out, oh, he feels obligated to. Again, it's going to be interesting to see why Palpatine wants him at such a ceremonial event, ceremonial meeting, because, you know, it's why even Ferris is wondering it. So it's also going to be interesting to see whether he is aware of Ferris's little stunt at letting Astri go, the saboteur. I don't really have anything else to say. I think the last thing I have to say is that Wikipedia, I went onto Wikipedia and I think I fixed it, but it says that this book, Return of the Dark Side, has 144 pages. But my copy has 135 pages. And so I actually went and I think Wikipedia got it wrong, because if you count the pages that aren't necessarily the story, you know, the first couple of pages and the very last page with no text on it, you know, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then of course on the very last page, which is blank, because it ends on the page before, 9, which does add up to, of course, 144 if we go from 135. So I assume that Wikipedia got it wrong. I assume they got it wrong. Because usually the way Wikipedia does it, from what I've seen, it counts the pages of the story, not the book as a whole. So, you know, while this book has 144 pages, the story's only 135, because, you know, you got all the extra text and copyright stuff on the first couple of pages, and of course you got the blank page at the back. So, I assume that's what Wikipedia was originally counting. It got it. I think it got it wrong. I could be wrong on that myself, but I think it got it wrong. And I think it is wrong, because again, why would there just be a blank page at the back there? But it is definitely going to be something that gets to me. So, yeah, we'll see how it goes. And, yeah. So I think that ends off my review for this chapter. And I'll see you all next time. Bye. Hello, I have just read Chapter 2 of The Last of the Jedi Return of the Dark Side. So the Ministers, I think some Imperials, some Ferrus, some Bogdavinian and Vader were all at the landing platform, as known as the Legislators, I think. The Legislator. It says the Legislators landing platform, so maybe that's the name of the building, I don't know. It doesn't make it clear what the Legislator is, but anyway. Everyone's standing there out in the heat. And Palpatine's overdue, he's late, and everyone's sweating, and we're giving some background to some of the little droids on Sath and Samaria as a whole, and how they have little droids on their shoulders, and then pretty much their personal assistants. They're what are they? Or also attached to specifically designed holsters, and they're all customised with different colours and jewelled insects. We're told that, I'm just going to read this out, all Samarians wore these small lightweight droids, which have been developed exclusively on the planet from a prototype design from Leisure Mech Industries. Each droid has a sleek design that combines the personal servant features of a luxury droid and the hard wiring of a tech droid. They were about the size of a lightweight mouse droid. Known as personal droid helpers, most Samarians call them PDs, or the more affectionate petties, which I found quite cute. And we're told that the petties are the reason why they pretty much keep track of everything from credits to transit records to the boot sizes. Everything about a Samarian's life is in there. Anyway, Vader's standing at the landing platform, and Ferrus again starts to wonder what Vader is, what species he is. He's definitely humanoid, but he wonders what Vader is. And the idea of how hot Vader must be under all that armour and stuff amuses Ferrus. Anyway, the Emperor finally arrives, and as he goes down the ramp, he gives his little greeting to everyone through extending out his arms. And Bogdavinium starts to walk over to him, but Palpatine ignores him and walks past him, making him look a bit like a fool, and instead walks over to Ferrus. And he commemorates Ferrus for restoring Samaria. And he explains that the Saboteur has escaped, and Palpatine says that was someone else's job, and he looks over to Vader, so that's why Vader was there. Still curious as to how he found out it was how he found out it was the Fountain Towers. But still, that's something that just confused me about the last book. It's Vader very quickly made his way to Fountain Towers, and it's like Vader spent almost an entire book getting there, and Vader just got there in like 2 minutes anyway. He explained, and Palpatine goes on to say that he did his job quickly, and that his efficiency has been noted. And he says, we value strength, we value efficiency in the Empire. It can be more valuable than strength, or perhaps it is a necessary component of strength. Very true. And as they walk, together, Palpatine's glad Ferrus stay behind, and he says it shows respect, and Ferrus says, a lack of transport, but he doesn't amuse Palpatine, he doesn't, but Ferrus enjoys cracking a few jokes, so he does it himself. And he asks Palpatine for an assessment on the situation. Ferrus starts going into how the computer system's back to 98%, and will be fully operational by the end of the day, and he says, I'm not talking about the infrastructure. I am not a bureaucrat. I am interested in your impressions of the situation. Ferris explains that the population was unnerved by the infrastructure crash, and that it left them feeling vulnerable. And Bog Davidian is hoping to exploit that vulnerability, and wants to hint that it came from the sabotage came from the neighbouring planet of Rosha. And Palpatine said, "They are here to negotiate a trade agreement." And Ferris says it's the first ever, and that we learn that the two planets have been technological rivals for decades. And that if Ferris says, exploiting the Samarian distrust of the Russians isn't a bad strategy to gain power, but it could backfire. Most Samarians now support trade with Russia. If they discover that Davidian is manufacturing the charges against the Russians, the whole thing could blow up in your face. You would have unrest here, and distrust of the Empire will grow. And that would feed resistance. I could simply blame Davidian and then remove him from office. Well, that is a strategy, but the Samarians wouldn't believe you. You have to use force to crush the planet. And that's when Ferris thinks, which you don't mind doing. And Palpatine asks about the resistance, and says that they've been quite successful in striking a few Imperial targets. Ferris says that they're small. Ferris has to play this very carefully, because you can't undermine them too much, otherwise Palpatine would get suspicious. But he couldn't make them seem too grand either, because then Palpatine would have a reason to double his efforts on getting rid of the resistance. And so Ferris just says their numbers are small. Palpatine says they seem well organised, and Ferris agrees. And we learn what they had done, which was being able to knock out some Imperial transports, and they had done it flawlessly. And it says if he didn't admit that, Palpatine would suspect his involvement. And Palpatine says he knows more about the Resistance than Vader, and he says Vader wouldn't admit it, but it's true. And Palpatine goes on to say that only Saf matters on Somalia. Knock something out on Saf, it affects the whole of Somalia. And so he wants Ferris to go over to the Resistance, which again, keep in mind, Ferris doesn't know where they are. And he wants to say he offers them amnesty, which again, just an official pardon, if they disband their resistance. And that's when Ferris is immediately just in awe of how Palpatine manipulated the conversation. Because Ferris was given amnesty, if you remember. He was given a pardon if he helped the planet of Samaria. And of course for Palpatine it's who better to go and tell the Resistance that it's safe, to disband their little group, than someone who has already been pardoned. Ferris wouldn't need to say words, they just believe him. And a little bit before he still says that, Palpatine explains how resistance results in problems for a society as a whole. There is property damage, restricted movement for all, an atmosphere of fear and distrust. The best outcome for this planet is that it continues to be a prosperous, well-run society. And while Ferris is having this conversation with Palpatine, it feels like he's in a dream, because I can't be agreeing with the Emperor. But and again, Ferris is well aware he is being manipulated. And anyway, just before they go on to the lift, Palpatine looks at Ferris, which is the last thing Ferris wants, because because just having to look at Palpatine's face is enough to make him lose his nerve, make him close to losing his nerve. Palpatine says he doesn't like to think so, but he's drawn to power. And he says not make any judgments yet because the Empire is still new. Again, this is only like a couple months after the rise of the Empire, 6 months or so. And he says that things before were corrupt and breaking down. You must admit that to be true. Yes. Ferris wonders just how much that corruption had been done by Palpatine. And Palpatine continues saying that he's here to demonstrate peace and stability is only possible through him. And he says that Ferris is standing at a crossroads and he should consider where he truly belongs. Because he flourished at the temple and he thrived under its rules and infrastructure, and what he is much better. And he says, a central clearinghouse in which the politics and stability of the galaxy are acted on by wise minds. And Ferris is astounded at the almost intimate knowledge Palpatine has of his past. And Ferris is surprised at it, but he's a different person now. He doesn't like to follow rules anymore. He had thrived but through the rules then. He doesn't thrive through them now. He hates having to follow rules. He definitely didn't want to be restricted by the Emperor. It goes, Ferris, as it says, when he spoke of Ferris's life as a Jedi student, he put his finger on exactly how Ferris experienced it. How could that be? They'd barely had contact. Anakin Skywalker having Palpatine's favourite, not Ferris. And Palpatine asks if he will do what he asked. And Ferris says yes, because he thinks at least if he does the job, it would help him get close to the Resistance, and he can help them resist the Empire. And as he's about to walk off, and as Ferris starts to walk off, Palpatine says he wants him to contact him directly when it comes to his progress reports. Ferris nods and is surprised because Vader was the only one who ever really contacted Palpatine directly. And he's curious as to what this meant. And it says, was Palpatine hinting to Ferris that Vader was not quite the favourite he appeared to be? Anyway, Palpatine walks back over to Vader, who's still in the exact same position he's been in since before Palpatine landed, apparently. And Ferris starts to feel a bit of relief as he makes his way down the turbo lift. And moving away from Imperial presence. And the last line of the chapter is another job. He's never expected that becoming a double agent would happen so fast. And that's where we end off the chapter. And next chapter is going to focus on Ferris's friends and Astriodo and Loon Divinion, so yep. Again, of course, we're not going to have Keats and Corrin in that chapter because, you know, they're on Coruscant. But anyway, Palpatine is, again, just so manipulative, and there is a reason why so many people really like his character. It's because he is just such a mastermind, and this is really portrayed here. He's controlling the conversation. He's making it so Ferris has to agree with him. Because, again, if Ferris doesn't agree with him, Palpatine will get suspicious. And so Palpatine's manoeuvring it in a very clever way, and he's manoeuvring it again in a very clever way, and having him go after the Resistance leaders and tell them to disband for amnesty. But Ferris knows that's just a way to break them up, make them weaker, and then Palpatine can go and eliminate them himself. Not himself, but you know, you can have the Empire go and eliminate them. Ferris knows he's being manipulated. He knows the tricks Palpatine's putting on him, but he can't do anything about it. Because if he just agrees, he runs the risk of Palpatine realising, hold on, something's not right here. So yeah, it's quite interesting. What else is there? Again, Ferris is again quite funny. I'm not sure if I've been as amused by his jokes in the past couple of books, but I think that's mainly been because there hasn't been so many jokes. So when the jokes do come, they kind of go over your head a bit. But you know, we were told in the Desperate Mission he makes jokes, and really a Dark Warning was really the last time I can really recall him making a humorous joke. I have started to kind of pick up on them a bit more again because it does seem like his remarks, his quick witty remarks are coming back a bit more. And you know, it was being picked. I did pick up on it here, but so yeah. Anyway, how many chapters are there in this book? I know I said there was 135 pages in the last review. What was it when it comes to chapters? That's 17. Oh no, that's not right. I'm fairly sure it was 18. Yep, 18 chapters. This is roughly around the length of Underworld, I think. Yeah, Underworld. So maybe a little bit longer. So not sure. So I think it was 8. I think Underworld was 18 chapters. It's something around that. It's 18, 17 or something like that. I know. I think Dark Warning was 17. Underworld was 18, I think. So this is about the length of Underworld. It's again Palpatine. I think Palpatine is kind of like the star of this chapter. He really is, and the way he's just is controlling Ferris. It really is in kind of such a masterful way. And I'm going to be curious to see just how Ferris prepares the resistance group for Palpatine. Because, you know, he now has to report directly to Palpatine. Palpatine may be able to pick up on something if he's hiding something. Mind you, he didn't pick up on the fact that he's hiding the fact that he helps Astrioto, the saboteur. But maybe Palpatine knows about that. I don't know. You know, he's Palpatine. How are you meant to know? But yeah, it's quite a curious thing. I think that I don't really have much else to say on this chapter, really. The next chapter seems to be focusing on Ferris's crew: Solace, Trevor, Olion, Astri, and Loon. Oh, and Bone and Dono. I knew I was forgetting someone. So yeah. Hopefully Donna's done a bit, or Donna is whatever you want to call her, is done a little bit better this book. Again, I was talking about how in last book I wasn't too keen on how Donna was portrayed. I think it just seemed like such a drastic change from how she was handled in Underworld. You know, the Desperate Mission. Because in the Desperate Mission, she definitely seems a very capable character. Whereas here, you know, whereas in A Tangled Web, you know, she seemed a bit pathetic. She couldn't really do much, which feels very contrary to how she was portrayed in Underworld. And sorry, I keep saying Underworld, the Desperate Mission. Mind you, we never saw her fire a blaster in the Desperate Mission, but you know, you got the sense that Donna was very capable. And it does feel like there was just something about her in A Tangled Web, and I think it was, if we maybe spent a little bit more time with her in A Tangled Web, if she has a couple more lines of dialogue, maybe she would have felt a bit more in character. But she didn't quite feel right in A Tangled Web, so I hope she starts to feel right here. So yeah. What else? oh, Bog Davinian, you know, he's trying to make it seem like the Russians were the reason why Samaria has the whole book in the first place. That's going to be interesting to see how that goes, you know, because if Palpatine exposes Bog, you know, that's just going to, it's going to be, you know, he's an Imperial, Bog's an Imperial. If Palpatine exposes Bog an Imperial for setting that whole thing up in the first place, it's going to bring in more distrust from Somalians about the Empire. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how Palpatine gets out of this one, unless Ferris already gave a suggestion. Yeah, he just says you'd have to use Force to crush the planet. Yeah, he says, well, that's the strategy, but the Somalians wouldn't believe you. You'd have to use Force to crush the planet. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that solves things. So there seems to be quite a couple of things we need to keep track of in this book as well, like the last one. So yeah, I think that's it. So yeah, that's my review for Chapter 2 of The Last of the Jedi Return of the Dark Side. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone! So I have just read Chapter 3 of The Last of the Jedi Return of the Dark Side. So this chapter is, again, on, as I've mentioned the last time, is focused on the Ferris's crew. For some reason I always get Ferris and Trevor mixed up. When I'm doing these reviews, I never get them mixed up when I'm not doing these reviews, but I get them mixed up whenever I'm talking about them or doing these reviews. But anyway, we learn that they've made their way back to the asteroid, and everything is in disaster. It is, and I think this is a really great thing. Not let me explain, because we've had so much build up to, oh, what have Reyna and Soma done? How much progress have they made? They made very little progress at all. We learn that Soma has gotten sick, and that Garen hasn't gotten much better, and Reyna is pretty much having to do everything herself. As it says, everything pretty much deteriorated. It's not going well. And, again, we're being given reminders of what happens. And, we'll learn that Trevor is starting to have his doubts about having more about finding more surviving Jedi, because they've only found 2 so far, Solace and Garen, and they've also found Obi-Wan, but then again, Obi-Wan's not interested because of course he's got to protect Luke, and we learn that Solace was not what he expected from a Jedi. He expected a Jedi to be placid and calm, but as it says, but Solace's moods ranged from grumpy to testy, and Garen was so badly wounded he's barely in any shape for any Jedi action, and it's not really capable of it anymore. And again, we're reminded that Trevor arrived here with Solace, Ollie, and Clive Flax, which is actually misspelled as Clive Fax, but it's Clive Flax. Roan and Dona, and of course Astri and Loon, and it says Loon is 6 years old here, but it's said in the Tangled Web he looks about 8. But again, it said he looks about 8. Well, he's actually 6. I think it was 8. I could be wrong on that, but I think it was 8. And we learn that they left behind the True Justice for a class space cruiser that was close to clunky. And we're told that when they arrived, they'd arrived to find that conditions had deteriorated. Toma had fallen ill, and though Raina had trained as a medic, she lacked the supplies needed to cure him. His recovery was slow, and he was still weak and shaky. And again, we're told how Raina worked herself to the bone, how Garen had tried to help her in the greenhouse, but he winded up overworking himself. He was just too weak to. And by the time the group returned, Raina was just in absolute exhaustion. And the group, and of course Ferris's crew, they as it says, they took stock of the situation, and Soros began barking out orders, and the situation was bad enough for Clive to obey, as it says. And here we're given a brief description of what everyone did, which I'll just read out here. Orion had turned out to be a knowledgeable gardener. He'd recalibrated the soil mix in the greenhouse. Already the plants and vegetables were showing signs of new life. Roan works on the exterior of the survival pod, which had been buffeted by a strong wind. Clive set to work repairing the land speeder. Dona foraged for edible plants and set up more evaporators. Astri helped with Garen and Toma, as well as tweaking the comm system that Toma had managed to set up before he fell ill. Trevor himself had helped wherever necessary, which meant he'd spent too much time putting weeds and watering in the greenhouse. That would have been bad enough, but he'd also gotten stuck with the most degrading, dirty, despicable job of all. Babysitting! Again, we reminded how Ferris pretty much entrusted him to take after Loon. And how he gave him that look where it was, do this, do it now, and don't complain. As that's what the look he became familiar with. And we learn that Astri being so close to Loon, it reminds Trevor of his mom. And he doesn't want to be reminded of her because she's dead. And I think that, that's quite sad. And we're told that he tries not to be around when Astri and Loon are together. And we're told that Astri hasn't cried when she got back with Loon, but she had a fierceness in her expression. And we've learned that there's a rare moment of light. Because of course the asteroid would occasionally travel by a star system or sun or a sun big enough to penetrate the storm, the atmospheric storm, and the atmosphere, the thick atmosphere, and they wouldn't be able to see without glow lights. And he's watching as Garen helps Loon levitate a ball with the Force. And Garen has pretty much quickly taken up training with Loon, and everyone seems to be quite happy with it except Astri, who's just worried because it's, being a Jedi during the Empire is quite dangerous. And we can tell that Trevor would like to be able to move things with his mind. He would have tons of credits. And again, we're reminded that Bog Davinian wanted to take Loon away from Astri and make him a pilot. That was because he knows he was Force sensitive. And although Ferris had foiled that, Astri keeps on worrying. Clive eventually makes his way over and he starts complaining, saying that we learn that they had a routine come round, which Ferris doesn't quite know how the routine came around, but it just did. And anyway, Clive comes over and he says, "Leave it to Ferris. If there's an unspeakably dreadful patch of rock you can land a starship on, he'll find it." And we're told it was a variation of what he said every day. Clive was meant for cities and teeming worlds with traffic and restaurants and dangerous characters. He'd once been a double agent during the Clone Wars, as well as a musician and industrial spy. There didn't seem to be anything he couldn't do. And they start to settle, and they have a bit, and there's a bit of gossip going. Like, there's a bit of gossip, and of course Clive continues complaining, going, Astrid says as she brings over some tea for them, that what do you expect? Fine hotels and sunshine every day, and Clive says, well, I don't see why he's seen it before. He's eating in high hotels. And he says Ferris just has to make things hard. And Mayor points out that he isn't even here. Then the others begin to walk over to them, and Donna appears with a basket of bread that she managed to bake every day, despite her other chores. And Bones walking over with the table as well. And this was the moment I was reminded, oh, of course, Donna's cooking. I completely forgot that she did cooking. And I completely forgot just how much Ferris hated having to eat her soups every single day. Because it was just so repetitive. Because they were good. You know, the Desperate Mission made it clear the soups were good. It's just having to eat it every single day. And it was, not more soup. So that's quite you. So I like how Zona's had her cooking come back, and again she doesn't get to say much in this chapter, but I like how they brought back her cooking, because I completely forgot about that. I completely forgot she did cooking, so that was quite a nice surprise. And she starts handing out some loaves of bread, and she says, a long day's work, it feels good. And Clive says, if you say so, mate. And Rowan gives Clive a nudge with his foot and then chops a loaf of bread on his chest. He says, maybe this will revive you. And we're reminded about what Olin Nance is, which I'm not going to get into here. You're gonna... We're on the review of the 6th book. If you've been watching these reviews, you probably either read the book yourself or... or, you know, you've been keeping up with the other reviews, so... Because I doubt you've come onto this review and not read the book or seen the other reviews I've done for The Last of the Jedi. But anyway, we're also told that Clive claimed to not believe in anything but credits in his accounts, but, you know, but we all know, and it even says in the book that he's loyal to his friends. And then Solas and Orion joined them, and we're told that they were the unofficial leaders. A reminder is that Orion ran a successful spy network during the Clone Wars. And Orion says that Ashley was able to fix the comm system, and that Thomas got the storm tracker working, so they were able to get a message to Coruscant, and they learned that Keats and Curran are out of danger and hiding with Dex. And he has a little bit of additional information about how they're driving Dex crazy. And Rowan says he's glad to hear that, even though he's never met Keats and Curran, but you know. And he thanks Astrid. And again we're reminded about we're reminded that Keats and Curran are part of the Erased. And we learn that even though Trevor is out here with the crew, he wished he was in the he was hiding in the east of levels of Coruscant in the Orange District. Anyway, Donna hands him some tea, Trevor, and Trevor some tea, and then Garen and Noon come over, and Astrid spreads some honey on Noon's piece of bread. And then Rayno and Toma come over, and we're told that since we last met him in Dark Warning, the thing is, Rayno and Toma, they've been absent since Dark Warning, and you know, for me, I'm reading this on the 2nd of February, 2026. I finished Dark Warning just before the end of 2025, you know, something like the 30th, 29th I finished it. So... and that's the last time Rayno and Toma appeared, so it's been over a month since since I've seen them, so it's quite interesting to have them back. And Dark Warning, it may just be one of those books that I have to go back and read. I think you know, it's one of those books where it stays in your mind, and you do remember it, but it's one of those books where it would benefit if you read it again. Anyway, back to the summary. Because again we're told that Toma has grown a beard since his illness, and that it was streaked with grey, and he moves with careful attention. It says he moved with the careful attention of someone who had recently been ill, and Raina brings over two stills for Dona and Roma for Toma, and sits down on a rock and explains that Toma has news. And Toma explains that thanks to Astri, he's been able to get into contact with with someone he knew in the Resistance on his homeworld of Akarin. And he asks if anyone's heard of Moonstrike, and Orion explains the astronomical event Moonstrike, which is when a satellite moon gets hit by an asteroid and it changes its orbit, and you can alter planetary tidal patterns and influence severe weather changes. And Toma says that's what it is, and it's also the name of a secret organisation. He explains that this contact is ahead of it, and it's a woman named Flume. Not Flume, Flame, sorry. Flume, actually, if it was Trevor's sister, anyway, it's Flame, and we're told that she was an extremely wealthy aristocrat on Akarin. When the Empire took over the planet, and her family used to run the biggest factories and corporations on the planet, and she was able to get most of her wealth out before the Empire took over the main industries, and she uses that wealth to fund Moonstrike, going back to Darth Plagueis with Mune, and it's pretty much a thing to keep people to keep different resistances in contact from planet to planet. And she's using all her funds that she can to raise more funds through her contacts. And it says she'll use what she has to fund. She used what she has to fund them and raise more funds through her contacts. The point is organisation. We can accomplish so much more if we're in contact. She's putting her personal fortune on the line. And Clive asks what that has to do with them, and Toma explains that he's learned that Flame is on her way to Samaria. And he says it could be helpful for Ferrus, but unfortunately he wasn't able to tell her that Ferrus was on Samaria. But it's linking... But he says, but a linking of resistance movements could only help any surviving Jedi. They could move about the galaxy relying on safe havens. They wouldn't be stuck hiding out on an asteroid. And Olian is a bit cautious, and he says it's a plan, but the more people that know about the Jedi, the more danger they're in. And Soros agrees, saying that they have to worry about the safety of the Jedi they haven't found yet. And Clive mentions that they've only found 3, and again, some of them know about Obi-Wan's existence, but they keep that secret. And none of them know about Yoda either, aside from Obi-Wan. But then Gavin gives a small smile and says, "I'd say 2.5 Jedi, actually. I'm not worth much these days." And Soros says, "You're far more worth than you realise." And she says it in such a gentle tone. It's the gentlest tone Trevor's ever heard Soros in. And Raina says that if any case, Ferrus should be aware Flame is there. And we'll try to make contact with the Resistance. If Ferrus is there to help them. And they start having an argument about who should go. Sola says she'll go, and Orion says she'll be too conspicuous because the Empire is on the lookout for her. And he says he'll go, and then Sola says, you're not conspicuous?" And Clive says he says he'll go, and that he can't wait to get off the rock. And Rowan says, "Wait a second, if anyone goes, it should be me. I have the most experience with resistance movements." And Orion says, "You just escaped from an Imperial prison. You don't have any ID docs. You can't go." And Rowan says he can forge ID docs in no time. And Thomas says this shouldn't be an argument and they need to decide on a person. And Rome says thanks to, of course, Astri, they've been able, it says that the storms will lessen in severity in about 5 hours, and that'll be a good time to take off. He suggests that they get some rest and then decide, once they have some rest. And everyone agrees and they all go back over to their shelter for some sleep. And Trevor, there, he didn't say anything because he knew they would all say no. But he feels he should be the one to go. I'm just going to read it out. Trevor walked back slowly. He hadn't said a word because he knew the others would disagree. He should be the one to go. He was the least conspicuous. Nobody paid attention to kids. He knew resistance movements almost as well as Roan. He was a good pilot and a better fighter. He could be useful. The only reason he hadn't stayed in the first place was that Ferris practically kicked him off the planet. And we're told that the thing that really bugs him about everyone, about Ferris, is that no one seems to be worried about him. They all think he's fine. They think he's this hotshot Jedi. That's fine. But he's surrounded by Imperials, Stormtroopers, wicked droids, and Vaders there. And they all assume that he's fine because he's just some great hotshot Jedi. And Trevor thinks, well, Trevor had news for all of them. Ferris wasn't a Jedi. He had done some amazing things, no question about it, but Trevor had also seen how he'd struggled. He'd seen him make mistakes. And he knows Vader's no help for... He knows Ferris is no match for Vader. And he knows Ferris needs help. So he waits until everyone's asleep and he goes and steals his cruiser. And he starts flying up into the atmospheric storm. And he's struggling for a bit of control. But he starts making his way through it. And we're told that Trevor, that he had to gather his courage, because even though he's made this journey, as it says several times, even though it's been about, what? Probably 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5? Definitely not 7. At least that's, I always take several as meaning 7, but anyway. We learn that even though he has to gather his courage, because even though he'd tell you he doesn't fear this journey, he does, because it's always, because he's flying through a storm, he's always going to be a little bit terrified. And he thinks if Ferris and Solas have done it, he can do it too. And so he starts to fly this ship off, and he gets a bit caught up in the storm, he struggles a little bit, he's moving with the flow of the storm though, not fighting for control. And he thinks it wouldn't be easy, but he would do it, and he had to. The others are going to be in for a big shock when they find out. That's where we end off the chapter. So, again, I might be repeating some stuff I've said a little bit earlier, but I personally enjoy. I like the fact that it wasn't thriving, the asteroid. I like that Raina and Toma were struggling. It was such a subversion of expectations, because there's been so much talk about in Ferris's mind about how much he wanted to see them again and how much he wanted to see the progress they had made. Only for it to wind up being this absolute disaster of a situation. How Toma has fallen ill, how Raina's parents having to work everything on their own, you know. I like how it wasn't what I think many of us were expecting. Again, it's going to be interesting to see where that thing with Moonstrike leads to. And it's going to be interesting to see, because I get the feeling that's going to be how Ferris finds the resistance on Somalia. You know, I bet he's going to come into contact with Flame or find Flame, and he winds up finding them through her. It feels like but then again, it does feel a bit obvious. Like that feels like it's the logistical route for him to go. You know, So, you know, it seems maybe a bit too obvious, if you ask me, but it's going to be interesting to see how that works. Again, Clive, friendly. It was quite a mood, let's be honest, in this chapter. It's quite a bit of a mood. Gavin Mullen. Again, I'll never know how you pronounce his last name. I think it's Mullen, but you know, maybe Mullen. If you watch my Dark Warning reviews, you know how much I was really struggling with his name. But I think it is Mullen. But anyway, you know, he. Again, we didn't get too much from him. We only had about one line of dialogue outside of a couple of miscellaneous lines from lessons he was teaching Noon, like, don't try, just do. And there was another one that I can't remember. But, you know, it's nice to see that he's a bit healthier now. Still not incredibly healthy, but you know, he's a bit healthier now, so that is nice to see. Again, Trevor, he's being crafty. Trevor, I don't know how I didn't expect Trevor to not do this, because it seems like such an obvious thing for his character, yet, somehow I do not predict it. I have no idea how I did see Trevor stealing the ship when everyone was asleep from a mile off, you know, because of course Trevor would do that. Of course Trevor would do that. And I've been reading this for the past 5 books, you know, and I didn't expect that from Trevor. But so yeah, I don't really have anything else to say, really. So I guess I'll end this review here. Rome throwing the loaf of bread onto Clive is also a bit humorous to me. But anyway, I think that I don't really have anything else to say. If I have anything else to say, I'll tell you in the next review. But I don't think I will. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I've just read Chapter 4, The Last of the Jedi Return of the Dark Side. So, we're in the Hall of Ministers again on staff, and Bog Davinion's being awarded his tribute, and Ferrus, Vader, the Emperor, Bog Davinion and Aaron Larker are all on a little platform that raises up about a metre into the air, and Ferrus is trying to hide in the crowd, but Palpatine signals him over. And Aaron Larker begins the tribute, and before that, we're also giving a little bit of description on We're also giving a little bit of Ferrus's thoughts on Bog, and he's surprised that some of the delegation from Rocha is here, considering all the lies Bog's been spreading about them. And how he made it sound like Larker's support of the trade agreement was a big mistake. And Ferrus thinks that Bog is just a dim-witted, conniving dolt. But he has to reluctantly admit that he was clever in trying to win over the population. And again, we're reminded that Bog had taken credit for fixing the computer virus. And he never stopped praising the Southerns, which allowed him to gain more favour with them. And then, of course, Larker begins the speech. And it's made clear, and Ferrus finds it extremely clear that he's pained to have to give the awards to Bog, of all people. And he's wondering how long Larker will last as well, because there's already votes of no confidence to get him out of office. But anyway, he then starts And again, he thinks Bog was a bit of a fool to try and, what does it say? When he arrived on the planet, he thought Bog was foolish to expect that he could rule Samaria. Now he saw that Bog hasn't been overconfident in the least. And Larka begins the tribute. And, he says that he would like to present him his own petty droid. And he even says that, I would like to present the award of the city of South to our Imperial Advisor, Bog Davinian, who aided us so capably during the crisis. And Bog is given his little petty. Ferris thinks he's probably not quick-witted enough to note that Larka only referred to him as capable. And that honestly also went over my head, so... And, Bog is smiling broadly and throwing out a couple jokes, saying, you know, I always wanted to get my hands on one of these. And he's saying, I hope he's going to reform me, get me to meetings on time, better yet, maybe he'll show me when to take a break, and there's laughs and cheers. And he starts his little speech. And he says that he's very proud to be an honorary Somalian. And he feels like, even though he's been here for a few months, he feels like he's been here all his life. That he finds the Somalians to work hard, play hard, and make things happen. And that's something that other planets have a hard time with. And it's quite clear he's talking about Rosha. And he says that they may be a target, but that some planets may want to bring them down, and they may be a bit of a target. But he says it's not going to happen because the Sumerians always win. And again, he says that he's proud to be an honorary Sumerian. And the hall goes wild, and everyone's crowding around Bog. And Ferris Vader moves closer to Palpatine, and they start having a conversation which Ferris uses Jedi training to drown out the noise of the crowd and listening to Vader and Palpatine. And the conversation goes, he was promoted beyond his competence, we thought. Palpatine says, but look at him. He is a fool, Darth Vader said. Yes, Palpatine admitted. He is exactly what we need. And anyway, as during the little bit among the Ferris is later among the crowd, and he finds Larka, and he starts a conversation with them. And Larka again thinks that you must be very happy about this, and Ferris says not particularly. And Larka says, do you hear them? They are transferring their loyalty to an Imperial Advisor, which I suppose makes you happy. And Ferris says, not particularly, and Larka goes, you're one of them, aren't you? And Ferris explains that he was hired to help, but he's not officially an Imperial. He says, no, I did a job for them, there's a difference. And Larka's not buying it, he just says, keep telling yourself that. And Ferris explains that he knows Astriodo how to do the computers, and that she told and says that she must have contacted him, and he says that she did. And Ferris says, then you know you can trust me, and Larka is still not buying it, saying that you can't trust anyone. And Ferris says if Bog keeps spreading these rumours about the Russians, you can always come out and admit to it, and that's when Larka says that and get arrested. He says if he does that, he'll get arrested and Bog will become governor. And Ferris says that you might not have a choice given Bog's already lining up a lot of support amongst the ministers to out him. And Larka continues, saying that they won't be... I'll just read this out. They won't betray me in the end, Larka said. I've been working on establishing this agreement with the Russians for years. The ministers all support it. The time to keep industrial secrets is over. We are each technological innovators, but if we work together, we can make even bigger strides. We are experts in macro technology. We can run cities, planets with our systems. They have made enormous strides in microtechnology. Their droids are among the smallest in the galaxy, with the most sophisticated systems. We had a setback when Roche sided with the Separatists during the Clone Wars. They were deeply involved with the Jade Federation. They've come to regret it. Now we can achieve a real trade agreement. We can share our technology. And first, there's not if the Empire has anything to say about it. And Marcus says that they don't fear a system-wide trade agreements. They don't want the economy to crash. But Ferris says that's right, but they want to control it. And he asks, why do you think Bogus are against the trade agreement? And Marcus says, because I want the trade agreement to happen, that's reason enough. And he knows the Sumerians are afraid of the Russians, so he'll just take advantage of that. And then he says, you say you're just a contract worker working for credits. You know something about me that can bring me down, yet you don't use it. Why? And again, Ferris tries to convince him that he's on his side. And that the Emperor... And then he discloses the facts that the Emperor wants him to find the resistance on Somalia, and that he wants to give them amnesty. And Marcus says... And this is pretty much where Ferris made a mistake. He shouldn't have mentioned that, because then the conversation goes a bit sharply, and Larkus says, do you expect them to do that? And Ferris says no, but he hopes to help them if he can find them. And just crossed my pages. But he hopes to help them if he can find them, and he explains that he was one of the founders of the 11 on Balasa. And he says, and Largus says that the Empire's still in control, and Ferris says that you can't root them off the planet, but you can make it hard for them to control them. And you can wait for better opportunities. And Largus says, so you were one of the founders of the 11, and yet you are here. Were you offered amnesty by the Emperor too? And this is where the biggest mistake Ferris makes in the conversation, because he says yes. And Narco looks at him with contempt and says, so you took it and abandoned your cause? And Ferris says, not exactly, he's still helping his cause, but in a different way, and he's lost Larker at this point, and he says that he can't help him, and he walks off. It says, there's his assistant comes over, and he says that the Russian delegation wants to talk to him, and Larker walks off, and then Vader comes up to Ferris and says that he has quite a long conversation with Larker, and Ferris says that he's a chatty guy, and Vader says to not forget who he's working for, and that Larker is not to be trusted, and Ferris says that don't think anyone's meant to be trusted, and Vader says, the Emperor gave you an assignment. I expect a full briefing. You can expect it, but you won't be getting it. Ferris was beginning to enjoy himself. The Emperor's instruction was to report to him directly on my progress. No one else. And that would include you. And Vader gets very frustrated. He just stands there for a moment. And then walks off. Ferris knows his meaning, which is, I'm going to enjoy destroying you. Again, I don't have a whole lot to say on this chapter, really. To be fair, I was actually struggling to focus on this chapter because hurting a little bit, so I was struggling to focus a bit on it. I was able to focus on it enough to retain the information, to retain what happens, but you know, I think the conversation with Aaron Marcus maybe the key point, and I think, you know, it's how Ferris lost his interest. You know, he just did not play that conversation right. He really was just... He shouldn't have said yes. or brought up the resistance in general. You know, that's what lost Larka. And you maybe should have thought a bit more about that. And also, you should be very careful what you're saying, because he can listen into Palpatine and Vader's conversation, because he's force sensitive. What's to say they can't listen in on his conversations, you know. So he's got to be very careful. What else? I don't really have a whole lot else to say. We see a bit more of how Bog is manipulating the Sumerians into having a bit of disdain for the Russians. Yeah. So it really just does make you not like Bog more, really. You just don't like him. You didn't like him a whole lot to begin with. You don't like him anymore now. You just made feeling a bit more contempt for him as this goes on. Maybe we saw a bit more of Aaron Larker, because if you remember in the last book, I was saying how it felt like we just didn't see enough of Aaron for his reveal to be impactful, because, you know, we only saw him for about one chapter where he introduced himself, and that was it. You know, that was it. But here, you know, I like we're getting a bit more with Aaron. I think it's maybe a little bit late for us to have a bit going on with Aaron, but you know, it's alright. It's good. Do I have anything else to say? I really do not have a whole lot to say on this chapter. I'm sorry. I guess Bog's remarks were quite funny about the petties, the petty droids, the PDs. What were they? Personal droid assistants? I think that's what they were. I think that's what the PD stands for, so, yeah. I don't really have anything else to say, I'm afraid. So, yeah. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, everyone. I don't really have a whole lot to say on this chapter, but I've got to do a review on it, so, I have just read chapter 5 of The Last Jedi Return of the Dark Side. So pretty much this entire chapter consists of Ferrus following Aaron Larker's aide, Dahl. And that's literally all you need to know. Because if I was just to tell you where it was going, it would just be too much of a... It would just be getting too much into detail. But pretty much Ferrus is following Dahl. And it seems like Dahl doesn't even know he's being followed, even though he knows he is. He's making sure he isn't being followed. Well, he doesn't know he's being followed, but he's making sure he isn't being followed, but also doesn't exactly know if he is being followed. So he's not always taking the precautions to make sure he's not being followed, and lose people if they are following him. But Ferrus assumes that Dahl is how Aaron Larker gets in contact with the Resistance, and so he's following Dahl around. He follows him into an air taxi, then follows him to a cafe where someone bumps into a waiter or a waitress, a young woman, and the waiter or waitress drops the tray of glasses, and everyone looks over, but Dahl escapes through a back exit. Ferrus follows by leaping on top of the roofs. Then he sees him go into a kind of like a speeder sale thing, into like a speeder garage, and Dahl looks around and then leaves and goes into an alley, and then the young woman who's bumped into the waitress and fairly short pops over, has a look around, then leaves and goes into the alley. Ferrus continues following them until they get to a canteen, and Ferrus waits a few minutes and then goes in himself, and as he sits down, that's when he feels a blaster come onto his back, and, well, someone says in a deep voice, and I assume it's Dahl, and he says, yeah, it's a blaster, so don't make a move, I'd like a bird with you in the alley. And that's how this chapter ends. Again, I have literally nothing to say on this chapter, so it's going to be tough to try and think of anything to say. The next chapter seems to be about with Trevor. Anyway, again, really nothing to say on this chapter at all. But you know, it's interesting to see how Ferris is still going after Dahl. He's going after Dahl because you would think he would maybe trying to build back up that trust with Aaron Larker. But instead, you know, he's going after his aide, which probably isn't going to help much. But, you know, he's got to find the resistance movement on Somalia, so, yeah. I literally have nothing else to say, so. I can see Ferris's Jedi training coming to help here. And, again, him being sneaky is also part of him being part of Odin Lands, if you remember. You know, so yeah. Again, I have nothing to say in this chapter. There is pretty much nothing to talk about in this chapter. I should have probably just read chapter 6 and combined these two reviews. But yeah, I have nothing to say on this chapter. Given it literally just is moving the plot. I've said that with some chapters before, but you know, there's usually something to talk about. There is literally nothing to talk about in this chapter, so yeah. But you know, it's going to be interesting to see who's got that blaster to him, who it is. So soon. I assume it's Dahl who's got it, but you never know. But anyway, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, I have just read Chapter 6 of The Last of the Jedi Return of the Dark Side. I'm flying through this book. I'm only only started the book yesterday, and I'm getting close. I'm halfway through. I'm about 17 pages away from halfway through, so which is about I know what people were going to say, 67 and a half. Anyway, this chapter again is focusing on Trevor. And poor Trev, the ship is barely holding together. And he thought he could handle anything the galaxy could throw at him, but he barely made it through the storm, and we learn that he knows where Flame will be, because she gave the coordinates to Toma in Toma's private database. But he had about 2 more minutes before we lost the engines and crashed. And he thinks, well, maybe it hasn't been the brightest idea to take off like that. But he thought at this point he has nothing to lose. He thought he'd either be space dust or succeed in finding Flame and Ferris. Anyway, the controls are a bit sweaty from his hands, and he's making his way down to the ground, and his craft is a bit, and the cruiser's a bit out of control now, and his plan was to come in fast and hug the ground and hopes of evading any Imperial tracking sensors. And of course, Trevor is technically supposed to check in and land at the main landing platform and stuff, but of course, he's Trevor. He doesn't like rules. And we learn that when he hasn't been worrying, he's been checking the nav database, and he says the area he was supposed to land in lay outside Saf, in the Samaria, and as Samaria had vast areas of wilderness, and the Crystal Forest is one of them. And we learn that it was a popular destination for tourists and campers, but much of it was still wild. And we're told that the Crystal Forest was formed millions of years ago when Samaria was a nice planet. It's now a desert planet, but yeah. And it gained the name I guess it gained the name Crystal Forest because it had formed sort of crystals. That it have formed tree-like shapes and cliffs out of crystals, and that went to hundreds of meters high. And it's apparently meant to be an inspiring sight, but all Trevor cares about is good cover. And Trevor starts to grip the controls as the ship continues to fail, and he sees the forest below. and and he's quite impressed by its beauty. It says it was oddly and eerily beautiful, but as he keeps flying, the ship is struggling to manage as it keeps on lurching and stalling, and he's looking for somewhere to land. And it says this place has seemed so galactically cool from the relative safety of the atmosphere, but the tree-like formations weren't so cool when you were heading straight toward them. And we learn that this place has its own weather system too, and there's lots of winds that are battering the ship. And Trevor keeps screaming out loud. He screams out loud when a crystal shrieks from the impact of when the ship shrieks from the impact of a sharp crystal scraping along the side. And Trevor knows he has to bring the ship down now, or he would die. And he starts searching now, and he starts to descend with one wing bashing into a crystal formation. And he's just saying to the ship to just hold on. And he sees a small little area on his right, and he remembers the trick of Pharisees. And I'm fairly sure this is the same trick that they used against Boba Fett in Dark Warning. I could be wrong on that though. I'm fairly sure it's the same trick. I could be wrong on that, but I'm fairly sure it is. And it says he remembers the trick of Pharisees, and he cuts off the engines and makes a hard right, and turns to a hard right and crosses his fingers, and he lands into the little area, makes the quarter turn, the ship shudders, and then it stops. And Trevor feels his body fly up, and then his teeth bite down onto his lower lip. And Trevor's still alive, even though the engines are now completely dead. And there's no hope for the ship to get back going, really. It takes Trevor several minutes to be able to move because he's just shaking so much. And he's telling himself to get a grip, you're safe. And we learn that he had been embarrassed to be in such a state of terror, and he thought, and even though he's been a lot through the past month, which, 5 books adding up to only a month, but we learn he thought he was quite brave, but he realises that a lot of his bravery was borrowed from Ferrus. Anyway, he makes his way down to the ramp. The ship has basically collapsed in on itself, and if the ramp isn't able to come out, it's going to be in a little bit of a problem, but not impossible to get out. But it does work. It doesn't go out all the way, but it gets out enough for him to get out. And he has to jump down. And checking the data, and outside is actually quite surprisingly cold. It says, although the subsurface temp readout on the ship had prepared him for heat, the hard crystal formations and the forest floor radiated coolness into the air. And we learn that Flame had given Toma coordinates where she would land and see if anyone, and where she said she'd wait there for at least 2 hours and hope that Toma could send someone to meet her. And we learn that the 2 hours were up half an hour ago, but Trevor's still hoping that she'll be there. And he starts moving towards the coordinates. And Trevor's observing the crystal forest, and he knows no wildlife could live here because there's no water, no vegetation. And he hopes he'll bump into Flame soon because he's starting to get a bit spooked out by the place. And that's when he hears the whirs of Imperial speeders, and he wants to leap out at them, but of course he knows better, and he knows to be a bit cautious, and so he hides behind one of the crystal formations, and 2 Imperial speeders fly by with 4 stormtroopers in each speeder. And Trevor watches them go by. Then he sees a silver speeder go by, and he didn't get to take a great look at him, but he assumes it's Flame. and he sees it's a black figure in a black flight suit and a black helmet, and he tries to signal to a suit again. He assumes it's Flame. He tries to signal to her with a glow light, but it's too late. She's gone far enough now. And Trevor starts to spring back to the rock, the crystal rock, or just a rock. But it's a bit too late because the Imperial speeders have circled back, and one of them breaks off as they spotted Trevor. And they was coming straight for him, and that's where we end off the chapter. I quite like how, Trevor's been quite often portrayed as a fearless, self-handling character, He very much takes care of himself. He very much holds himself in high regard, I think. Not in a sense of being, self-centered, but in the sense of he thinks he's very capable. He doesn't... He's the kind of character that's a kid that doesn't like being told he's a kid, even though he is a kid. And this really is a nice chapter for Trevor's character. Because it really does show that he's not just this self-handling kid, he's still very much is scared. He still very much isn't as brave as he thought he was. And I think that's something about his character that we haven't really seen before, and it's nice that we get to see it here. It's such a diversion of how we know Trevor to be, and I think it's one of those chapters where it's great to see that in his character. Again, this is one of the things about it being a book, we can delve into these situations a little bit more, go into them a little bit deeper, not make it seem like we're just adding on exposition, and I really do like how this has expanded Trevor's character a little bit. And of course, he's still Trevor though, even with no one around, he's still embarrassed that he was in such a state of terror. He doesn't like to be he doesn't like to be thought of as scared, he still wants to hold himself in high regard, and wants to appear very tough and strong, even though he's not really, even though in reality he knows he's not that. He doesn't know, but in the same time he doesn't know, but no, he does now. It's tough to explain, but this was quite a nice chapter for Trevor's character again. So yeah, next chapter seems to be focusing on Ferris again. So we're going to see who that guy in the alley was. So yeah, I'm going to end the review here. As again, there's not a whole lot to talk about in this chapter. It's going to be interesting to see how Trevor gets over to Saf though, or if he sees Flame again, or what happens with how Empire, now that they've seen him. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where he goes. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, I have just read chapter 7 of The Last of the Jedi: Return of the Dark Side. So Ferris is in the alleyway, and he's got the blaster. He's got a blaster pinned to his neck, and the guy that's pushing the blaster against his neck. As we later learn, he's called Dinko. And he's saying, and he's wanting proof that it is Ferris Solon. He keeps saying that the real Ferris Solon wasn't join the Empire, and Ferris Solon has to give him a bit of proof, saying that Dinko asks, where is the safe house for the 11 located on Balasa? And Ferris says, I can't tell you that. Give me another question. And he asked about the first job the 11 did on Balasa. And this is the thing that it gets a bit tricky, because the first job is a job not many 11 members know about. It was mostly a secret job, and it was pretty much breaking into Imperial headquarters and finding the names of the spies on Balasa, all of them. And Ferris isn't, and the thing is, that was information that was, for the most part, kept secret in the 11. But Ferris says that anyway, and Dinko asks about how many names they found. Ferris says 4, and Dinko lets him go. When Ferris asks how he knew about that, Dinko explains that when they started the resistance here on Somalia, he went to Usa and a couple other planets so he could study successful operations and see if he could. And he says he was able to get some strategy tips, and someone was kind enough to brief him on the job on the 11's first job, and Ferris immediately knows Dr. Amianton. And Dinko goes, how did you know? And Ferris explains that Amianton wasn't an 11 member until recently. And Will had a fractured wrist. And he says, because you said your contact was close to the group, but not in the group. Ami wasn't at that time, but she treated Will after the raid. He had a small fracture in his wrist, so she knew about it. And Dinko introduces himself as Dinko and says it's a code name and it's better if they don't know their real names. Which, fair. And he says, I guess I should say welcome to the Somalian resistance. And he brings him back into the cantina. And they sit down with the young woman that was mentioned in the last chapter, and a silver-haired man. And he introduced, and Dinko introduces them as Neck and Firefolk. And Ferris assumes the woman is called Firefolk and the man is called Neck. But he says, I think I've met Firefolk before, and the woman grins and says, try again, I'm Neck. And it surprises Ferris that the sweet-faced young woman taking one of the more hideous... it says, Ferris, this is what it says. Sorry. Ferris was amused at the idea of the sweet-faced young woman taking one of the more hideous species in the galaxy, the Neck Battle Dog, as her code name. He would have guessed she would have chosen the more fanciful Firefolk, tiny glowing beings native to the forest moon of Endor. He sat down. Again, the Firefolk, they're the Wisties, which, I wasn't expecting the Wisties to get a mention here. Surprisingly enough, I just wasn't expecting them to get a mention. If they didn't mention Endor, I wouldn't have actually caught on to them being Wisties. But, yeah. Anyway, they sit down and Ferris tells them about how Palpatine's offering them amnesty. And Firefolk says that that's good news because it means they're getting to them. And Ferris explains that the Emperor offered him amnesty and that it was a way to get on the inside and be a double agent. And Dinko says that it's something for them to consider. No, Ferris says it's something for them to consider, and then Dinko says it's a way to get arrested and he doesn't trust it. And Ferris tells him that he shouldn't. And Firefolk says that he's passed along a message and they refuse it, so let's move on. And Dinko explains that Ferris wants to help, and Ferris says, so far the Empire hasn't taken over your government. I think it's because the Emperor is still trying to consolidate power and he doesn't want to give any other planets a reason to resent him.
He's going to try to influence governments, not take them over. Willing governments will get governors. I've seen it happen on some of the core worlds. When the Empire tried to install a governor on Balasa, we revolted. And that's when they came in with a battalion and took over. You don't want that to happen. And that's when Zinko realises, oh, that's why Davinian is here. He's here to get elected. And Ferris nods and says that Sumerians accept Outlanders as eligible for becoming Prime Minister. And he says that Bog is gaining power fast, and it'll be a good thing for the Imperials if he gets selected, as they can then use him to point out how the Empire doesn't mean any harm. And Dinko says, and meanwhile the Sathans will just let it happen. We're going to let our enemy walk right in, we'll even put up a chair for him. Firefolk explains that the population is afraid of losing what they have. And Nick adds that if someone promises that they'll keep their personal droids and their comfortable life, they'll believe anything. And Ferris says that Bog is winning the game, and that he's already mustered up a support for no confidence against Aaron Larker. And Nick says that that's because he's bribing the ministers. And Ferris says if they have proof of that, that it could be helpful, and says the Emperor is still concerned with appearances. He might recall Bog back to Coruscant, but at the very least he would expose what he's doing and he's to lose support here. Which again, earlier in the book in chapter 2, he was mentioned that if Palpatine exposes Bog for making it seem like it was the Russians, it could just, completely crash support for the Empire on Somalia. And Zinko says that they can get the proof, and that's when we learn that the little petty droid Bog was given actually has a computer chip from an ally of the Somalian resistance, an operative, and it allows them to look into pretty much everything, of course, Bog's doing, his communications, his transactions, and they're expecting to get the proof within hours or maybe a day, but they're sure they'll have it, and that the droid records pretty much everything. And Ferris says that's good, but he explains, and he says that Bog isn't their only problem, but he's their biggest one at the moment. And he says it will take the Empire a while to replace him. In the meantime, Larker can consolidate his power, and you can recruit more members. And Zinko says if they can get rid of Bog, they will convince the Sathans that they're worth joining. And that's when Ferris says he has to go and contact Palpatine. And he says he'll say that they're considering his offer. And he says, in the meantime, it would be helpful if I could bring him something that will convince him I'm on his side. Do you have a drop? What's that meant to mean? Do you have a drop you don't use anymore that I can tell him about? And Next suggests the speeder place from earlier, and says that they've been using it for a month now and it's time to find a new place for a drop, whatever that's meant to mean. I was looking through the Google definitions. What on earth is drop? Does anyone here know what a drop is? Is it like I don't know what it is, because it sounds like a place to meet, but also, yeah, or maybe it's like the location of where they are or whatever. I don't know. But Ferris says that, okay, that's good, and how he asks how they can contact him again, and they say that if he knows the Twilight Fountain in Talos Square, if he goes there in midday, they can contact him there, and in case of emergency, they can use comlinks, but they have to keep the messages short in case the Empire's monitoring. And Ferris says good policy and nods goodbye, and he starts to leave, and he's feeling a bit reluctant. He's a bit reluctant to leave, because it wasn't just that this group reminded him of the 11, but of his time in the 11, but he felt like they were in danger, becoming involved with something that they just couldn't possibly win. And he said, and the last couple lines of the book are, he'd heard the Emperor's words, Palpatine spoke of letting the planet govern itself. But if Bog failed to take over, would the Empire just call in troops for an invasion? He didn't know. He just hoped that whatever the Empire was planning, the Resistance could survive it. And that's where we end off the chapter.
First off, I don't have a whole lot to say on this chapter, honestly. I can't believe I'm almost halfway through the book there. Yeah. Anyway, what can I say on this chapter? Because I really cannot say a lot. I wasn't expecting the twist with Bog Davinian's droid actually being a spy droid. Well, you go again, not a spy droid, but you know what I mean. I wasn't expecting that little twist, and I think it's quite a good twist as well. What else? There really isn't a whole lot to say with this chapter. I guess with Ferris, him at the start being having to prove who he is, you know, that was quite funny, because it was a real Ferris Odom wouldn't work for the Empire, for the Emperor. What else can I talk about? Again, I do not have a whole lot to talk about with this chapter. Really, just there's a lot of plots moving. That's the thing with the past couple of chapters. You know, it's just been a lot of moving the plot. It just really hasn't been a whole lot to talk about. Yeah, I have no idea what else to talk about, honestly. Nothing's coming to mind, so I'm probably just going to end the review here, because, you know, no point keeping it going if I have nothing to say. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Oh, this is quite a good chapter. I've just read chapter 8 of The Last of the Jedi, Return of the Dark Side. I've just gone back a bit too far in the book now. There we go. So, Vader is thinking now the situation on Somalia, it's not really that difficult. He's thinking even the full Bog Davinian is able to control the Somalians. Why does he, and he's just wondering, why is he here? You know, there are so many planets that need his attention, that could be threatened or given a directive, or would be worthy of or merited a personal visit, but Palpatine wants him here, and he wants him here for now. And we're told that in just a few days he brought the military chief in line. The battalion was secretly orbiting the Lemur 2 system, ready to be called in on a moment's notice. The captain of the battalion had drawn up a plan to guard the spaceport and station troops around the city. He was agitating to move in. Vader had quickly vetoed that ridiculous plan. It was just an attempt from a lesser military mind to thrust himself into importance. He had ordered the battalion to stay hidden until they were needed. If they had to stage a coup, they would, but it would be done quickly. Stationing troops without needing to was foolish, and it just fans the flames of resistance. Vader's continuing to think, so what is bothering him? And he turns to survey the government buildings on the artificial petal grounds of Samaria, and he knows what it is. He just doesn't want to say the name, Ferris Odom, and him reporting directly to the Emperor. And he's wondering why Odom hasn't left after restoring Platform 7. You know, he was given an official pardon, and he could have taken off, yet he's stayed. And when the Emperor came, he went straight to Odom, and Vader is thinking he's not about to succumb to petty jealousy, and he's thinking that those emotions were gone forever, and they were as foreign to him as love, and he felt love once, but he's failed at it. And he's turned his mind to
he turned his mind and power to what it says as other things, and what remained had distilled down to a pureness he relished: duty, a job to fulfill, power to grab and consolidate and protect, and a master to serve. We learn that when he first got into the armour, he felt trapped by it, but later learned to use it for both intimidation and isolation, and it allowed him to separate himself from the rest of the beings in the galaxy, and it turns out that that turns out to be quite useful. And he starts thinking, "Do you see me now, Obi-Wan? I'm not connecting to the living force. I am looking at it from a distance. It can't touch me now. You are wrong, my old master. I don't need to connect to it. I just need to control it." Vader turns away from this side of the area, and he pushes away the thoughts of his old master, and we learn that he's pretty much been able to get rid of most of his thoughts on his past until Olin turns up again, and he keeps on thinking that jealousy isn't an option for him anymore, but analysis is. And he's thinking he's adept at manipulation and at figuring out motives. He's always adept at thinking 10 steps ahead of everyone, but he just can't figure Olin out. If he's a double agent, then he thinks he's a fool because he's not going to learn anything, and he wasn't going to make a difference. And he's wondering, could he be half fascinated by the power he saw, and could he be manipulated to the dark side? And he thinks that's the only reason Palpatine would take an interest in him. And he wonders if Palpatine could be right, and if he knows that the dark side can be seductive for a Jedi. And he knows that he'll have to take steps to eliminate Ferrus, as it just can't allow him to flourish in the Empire, because he feels because he would just prove to be an annoyance to Vader. A tiresome annoyance, and with him always trying to replace him. And he calls a security guard at the main entrance of the Imperial headquarters, which are just the government buildings on Samaria, to bring Ferrus Olin over to him. And in less than a moment, Olin gets there, and Vader is a bit surprised that he didn't make Vader wait. But he thinks, as it says, Ferrus appeared in less than a minute. Vader was surprised he didn't make him wait just to show him that he could. But then again, Ferrus didn't play those tiresome games that Bog Divinium relished. And Ferrus very flippantly just says, "You wanted to see me, Chief?" And Vader hates his flippancy. And he thinks it's so unlike the way they were when they were Padawans together, and Vader's just really looking forward to the day where he can stab him with a lightsaber. Vader says he wants to report on the Resistance, and Ferrus reminds him that he only reports to Palpatine, and he says, "It's okay, I know you've got a lot on your mind, all that Resistance crush. If that's all, I am not interested in whatever the Emperor has asked you to do. Give me the report." And that's when Ferrus starts saying, no one knows where you're from. No one knows. You're the big mystery. Everyone wants to know who you are, where you came from, how you got involved with the Emperor. One day you weren't there, the next you were. And Vader just finds it, as it says, Vader found it extremely vexing that Ferrus wasn't afraid of him. He was used to feeling fear from those who were in his presence. And we're reminded of how he had scared Ferrus in Underworld, when he was making a fool out of Malorum for stroking him in the Jedi Temple, if you remember. And I completely forgot about that, but I was thinking, is this a moment from when they were Padawans? And then I thought, oh no, as it went on, it was, oh no, this is from Underworld. And how he had been so scared of, and how Ferrus had been so scared of Vader there, but he isn't scared of him now. And how he was more interested in humiliating Malorum and wanting Malorum to go and catch Ferrus himself. And he thinks he should have just killed Ferrus at that point rather than letting him go. And and he thought about how incompetent Malorum was, having all those prowlers and stormtroopers at his disposal, yet somehow didn't get Ferrus, and which I think is maybe a bit harsh, because Malorum is quite smart. And of course Odin has the protection of the Emperor, and Vader just can't touch him, and it's really infuriating him. And he's fantasizing about how he could so easily use the dark side to throw Ferrus against the wall. And but he knows he can't, because again Palpatine would get angry at that. And Ferrus says, "Not showing today? No, well, maybe when we get to know each other a little better." And that's when Vader hits Ferrus with 3 words. 3 words. And these words, they just hit, for some reason, really hard. And again, there were only 3 words. I know you. And Ferrus picks something up behind his tone, because even though it's his exact same voice that he's heard over and over again, it really hits Ferrus. It really does hit you when reading it, and Ferrus is, "You know me?" And again, we're told Vader never second guesses himself, and he rarely makes a mistake. And he was reacting to the Ferrus he knew, not the Ferrus that he's become. He knows that Ferrus was quicker and smarter now. And he tells Vader to go, and he says, "I know what you are. I know what you want. You are transparent. Go." Ferrus leaves without a word, and as Ferrus is leaving, he's wondering, he keeps thinking about those 3 words, "I know you." And he's even has to pause in the hallway, because again there was no special emphasis on them, it was just the exact same voice, and he's wondering if it was an emotion, a feeling, a taunt or something, and he knows it's the same feeling that it says it had struck the same chord in Ferrus, and he's thinking about it, and he knows he knew Vader too. And he stops in the hallway and looks over to the Vader's door. And he starts thinking, and then realises, hold on, Palpatine was the one who wanted to make it seem like Vader came out of nowhere, just like Darth Maul. But maybe he didn't come out of nowhere, maybe he's a Jedi himself. And then he starts wondering who it could be. It says, could it be? Ferrus turned and looked back at Vader's closed door, his eyes burned. He had known so many Jedi, crossed paths with so many, hundreds. He was known to many, and he was known to many. He had been Siritashi's apprentice, and all Jedi knew Siritashi. He stared at the closed door, wondering at the presence behind it. Who are you? And that's where we end off the chapter. Again, we get to see quite a bit of how Vader's feeling about Ferrus, and it's not really anything new. We kind of already know about how Vader feels about Ferrus, but you get a little bit of a deeper look into it, and you really just see how he really just wants to really just put Ferrus through it, yet he just can't because Palpatine is preserving him and protecting him. But that conversation between them, it's a very short conversation, but it is such a great conversation, just particularly because of the end. I know you. And it does make you think, how are you not catching on, Ferrus? Anakin was the closest to Palpatine. But, of course, he's been told that Anakin's dead, so, by Obi-Wan, so, yeah. But, that line, I know you, that really does hit quite hard. And it's such an intimidating line, it's only 3 words. It's only 3 words, it's so intimidating, and it's such a great line, I know you.
And it stops Ferris dead in his tracks as well. You know, he pretty much froze from those words, and it's, you know me? It's going to be interesting to see how, if Vader starts to blatantly disobey Palpatine and start going after Ferris himself at some point, because you really just see that contempt in Vader. Ferris is already his target, it's not Sanos Torno. So it's gonna be interesting to see how that goes. It's also going to be interesting to see who Ferris thinks Vader is, because he's starting to get close. He's figuring out that he's a fallen Jedi. So it's going to be interesting to see if he realises it's Anakin, or if he thinks if he thinks it's another Jedi as a whole. So it's going to be interesting to see what he thinks Vader is. So yeah, I think that I don't really have a whole lot else to say really. I think that's pretty much all I want to say on this chapter, because again a lot of it is a lot of exposition on how Vader's feeling, and it's a lot of what we're told in this chapter isn't really anything new. A lot of what we've been told, it's stuff that we're for the most part aware of. Oh, that just did come to mind though. Vader does suspect Ferris as being a double agent. So that's going to be interesting to see if he starts acting on that. And starts manipulating Ferris in such a way where, But then again, he doesn't quite know Ferris. He just can't quite figure him out. It's even stated that he's usually great at manipulating and being 10 steps ahead, but he just can't figure Ferris out. He can't tell if he's a double agent. He can't tell if he's actually drawn to the power the Emperor proposes. He just can't figure it out. He just can't tell. So it's going to be interesting to see how this goes. So yeah. I think that brings this review of chapter 8 to an end. I'm only 2 pages away from being halfway through the book. And the next chapter is also chapter 9, so no matter what, I'm going to be halfway through the book. And I've only started the book yesterday, so it's really, really good. The halfway point is 67.5. So, yeah, 67.5 pages, and of course there's 18 chapters, 9 is, so it's 9. But anyway, and that's chapter 9's next chapter, so, whatever, I'm going to be halfway through. So, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.